Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Dear Editor, which is our ongoing conversation series about scientific writing and publishing. So we're happy to see you this morning. My name is Erica Goodoff, and I'm a senior scientific editor in the Research Medical Library. Normally for these sessions, I'm joined by Larissa again. However, she got called to jury duty this morning. So I have Soraya and David here this morning to help me keep this webinar going. But I can talk about this subject just fine, so I will do that. And we have, this is again in webinar format. So if you have questions as I'm going along, feel free to type them into the chat if you would like. We also have the Q&A module open, and that will ensure that whatever you ask is anonymous. If you put it in chat, everybody will see it. Either way is fine, we're gonna monitor both. So we're gonna get your questions answered, and if I can't answer your question as I'm going along, you can, of course, email us, and we will also have the team available for the Dear Editor series, and you can always ask questions there. And we will also, after the session's over, post a link to the recording. We are recording the session this morning, and we'll have as well a copy of the slides for you to review. And we also have a handout with some resources that I'm going to mention as I'm going along, and as well as any citations that I refer to in the slides, so that you aren't trying to copy and paste from, the slide or something. So you'll have those available to you after today's morning session as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. In fact, let's start off with a poll. I would like to know, to those of you who have ever submitted a document for peer review, how do you respond when you get peer review comments back? Okay. I see a couple of responses coming in. Oh, there we go. All right. Leave this open for a couple more seconds here. I'm curious to see what people say. All right, looks like most of you have answered. So I'm going to end that and share the results with you. So lots of different responses. The most common one, of course, was most of you said that you read through those peer review responses and take the time to respond, which is great. Others have said you share them with co-authors, also an excellent thing to do. And occasionally vent to your spouse or your friend or whoever. And you know what? That's also a great answer. Let's see. Okay, I'll put that away for now. All right. So yes, the first thing that you do when you get peer review comments is take a second and breathe. It is actually okay to go and vent to someone who has nothing to do with the paper. In fact, that's probably what I would do, quite honestly. So it's important to keep in mind, though, that peer review is meant to make your research better. According to a 2019 survey of researchers across disciplines, 90% of researchers agreed or strongly agreed that peer review process improves the quality of their research. So even if initially you get these responses and you think, oh, they're so wrong, they've got it all wrong, remember that in the long run, this is meant to improve your research, and it's meant to make the field better, and it's going to help you. And in fact, other evidence shows that papers that have undergone multiple rounds of peer review tend to have higher citation counts than papers that were accepted quickly. So in the long run, this is going to make your research better, and it's going to help you as well, and hopefully get your paper cited more often than it might have been otherwise. So, so when you have that perspective in mind, yes, you probably don't want to just immediately respond and say, oh, you're wrong, especially if that's your immediate response. So take the time to kind of think over and process what those comments are about and what they're really saying before you just, jump in. And in most cases, unless you get a very short review, you're probably going to have a list of things that you have to go through. So it's probably something you can't do immediately anyway. And another important point, as a lot of you responded to this poll, you do want to share comments with your co-authors. And it may be, in fact, that you have to sort of divide and conquer to deal with some of these peer review comments. Maybe there's some things that one co-author can respond to better than you can. In any case, it's important to make a plan and determine how you're going to respond to these comments, who's going to respond to them, how you want to go about this as a team of co-authors. And another thing I wanted to point out here, there was an article a couple months ago in The Atlantic called "A Toast to All Rejects," in which a professor within her group kept track of everything that got rejected, papers, grant proposals, whatever. And whenever anybody hit 100, they had a party. Now, the point of this, of course, was to point out that everybody deals with this sort of thing. We all get critiques on our work. We have to deal with this. It's part of being in academia. And it was also a way to sort of remove that shame and stigma that you might feel, looking at, these reviews of your work. And also, ultimately, it's a way to say, okay, this is just part of life. So let's make our response to this feedback better. And that looks like David put it in the chat. You can also, the link to that article is also going to be in the handout at the end of today's session. But I thought that was an interesting approach to kind of normalizing the fact that we all have to deal with this to some degree. So once you get past that, get that perspective, okay, how do you actually sit down and respond to these comments that you're getting? The first thing to do is remember, you want to be polite and respectful. And quite honestly, even if the reviewer comments aren't all that polite, you should be polite. You can set that tone. Remember, again, keep in mind, this is meant to help you. These are meant to be, helpful critiques. So you can address all of them, in a way that's unemotional and that's logical and that will be ultimately make your paper better. So, for example, if you get a comment that a reviewer didn't seem to understand something or completely in their comments seemed to misunderstand what you were trying to say, even if that reviewer is wrong, you might need to step back and think, okay, maybe I need to explain this better. Maybe I need to restate this, or maybe I need to add a sentence in here explaining why that point that a reviewer made doesn't apply. Because remember, another person reading your paper once you've published it might have the same thought. So that's why it's best to not just, toss out everything anything a reviewer says that you immediately disagree with. So you might be able to take that and do something productive with it. And remember, if your reviewer doesn't seem to be an expert in your area, keep in mind a lot of your readers are also probably not going to be experts who are reading your paper. So if that's a comment that your reviewer is making as not somebody who's intimately familiar with your research, another reader may have that same thought as well. So these are things worth keeping in mind. And whenever possible in responding to peer reviewer comments, you want to make suggested changes and then report what you changed. So it should be clear that you've addressed each thing as you respond. And if you can't, if somebody, if a reviewer makes a comment that you just absolutely don't agree with or can't make, you'll need to explain why you didn't do that. So that's all very general. What do you actually do to respond to these peer reviewer comments? What you're going to have to do is come up with a separate document from your manuscript called a letter of response or response letter, or sometimes called a rebuttal letter. It's all kind of talking about the same thing. Basically, it's a document where you address each one of the reviewer comments. And there's really not a set standard way to do this. I've seen it done many ways. As long as it's clear, that's what's important here. So typically, these response letters will start with thanking reviewers for their comments and for their time. Again, that's part of setting the tone. Okay, we're going to make this very productive critique and respond to this feedback in a helpful way. You might also summarize general changes that you made and point out any new data or new analyses, especially major changes that you've made to your paper at the beginning of this document. And from that point, you want to make sure you address every reviewer comment, even if the ones that you disagree with. You can put all of the comments together and respond point by point. You can put reviewer 1 comments and respond to those, and then reviewer 2 comments and respond to those. It really doesn't matter as long as you respond to every comment that was made. Again, your responses should be, unemotional and clear and logical and easy to follow. Usually the way this is a good way to do this is list the change, explain what you made, and then you can actually copy and paste the text into this response letter. Now, if the change that you made is like, you added an entire page to the paper or something, obviously it doesn't make sense to do that. You can refer to it by page number, you can refer to it by line number, or by section, or something like that, as long as it's clear where you made the change and you explain that you made it and why you made it. If you did not make a change, you want to explain why you didn't make that change, or why that doesn't apply, or why that's not appropriate in this particular case. But again, definitely want to make sure that you respond to everything. And as I said before, you probably have some co-authors. You probably didn't write this paper by yourself. So you do want to share this response letter with your co-authors before you send it back to the journal, and make sure everybody agrees not only with the changes that you made, but with your responses as well. And as far as I said before, you don't really have to use any particular standard format. You just want to make it consistent. So this is an example of how you might respond to reviewer critiques. You might have the reviewer's comment in italics, your response in boldface, and the change in red text, or something like that. As long as it's consistent throughout the document, and reviewers can very easily go back and look and see what you did, see that you responded to every comment, and what changes were made in response to that comment. And I also want to say, if you use our editing services in the library and you've got a paper that you revised in response to review comments, and you have one of these response letters, we're happy to edit these for you as well. And make sure, again, that they're consistent and easy to follow and that sort of thing. So that's definitely within our purview to help you do that. All right. So, I mentioned this a few minutes ago. What do you do if you don't agree with a comment that a reviewer made? Again, it's okay to disagree with where the reviewer is coming from. Maybe they need clarification for why you chose a method. Maybe you need to state somewhere why this doesn't apply, or why something is beyond the scope of the study. It might be something that you need to add in, might be a statement you need to add at the end of your discussion section. Oh, this doesn't apply here. If you think another reader is likely to come up with, again, a similar sort of concern. But if you do say, okay, no, this doesn't apply, we're not going to do that, explain why, and ideally back it up with some evidence for why that doesn't make sense here. In most cases, you may make a small change in the text. If you don't, you definitely want to explain to a reviewer why this wasn't appropriate here. And if it's really something tricky, or you're not sure how to respond to it, you can always enlist your co-authors to help with it as well. It doesn't all have to fall on one person. In fact, most cases probably will not. So then we have this question, which is, what do you do if you get conflicting comments from your two reviewers? Most cases, you're going to have at least two people reviewing your paper. What if they say things that make no sense, that you can't even possibly do both? First thing to think about is you probably don't want to try and reconcile contradictory comments and try to satisfy everyone. I mean, that's impossible. If it's a major discrepancy, it might be a good idea to alert the journal editor that your reviewers had really wildly varying takes on the paper. Usually what happens if it's that major, the reviewer or the journal editor will typically send it out to a third reviewer, or they might serve as sort of like a tiebreaker in that sort of case. Typically, you aren't going to see a major discrepancy, but once in a while, it may get past journal editor, make its way to you, and you're just thinking, what do I even do with this? And I think in that case, it's okay to go back to the editor and say, okay, which way here? Can you give me some clarification here? Like, what's the concern here? Which one of these should I address? Otherwise, if it's not something like redo this entire section, this section is great. Okay, which is it? If it's not something that obvious, just kind of a small discrepancy between your two reviewer comments, what you can do is put the comments together in a response, indicate that there's a discrepancy between the two, and then just choose which one is most appropriate for this case, which thing you're going to address. And again, explain why. That makes sense in this case. Okay, reviewer so-and-so said this. Here's what we did to address that problem, and explain why that made the most sense to address reviewer one's comment as opposed to reviewer two's comment, or whatever it is. So hopefully that will get you through most discrepancies that you see in peer review comments. Okay. I'm going to check real quick. I don't see any questions so far, so that's great. All right. So I want to hear from you again. I've been talking about responding to all of these peer review comments that you get. So I want to know, has anyone here watching this today, has anyone here actually served as a peer reviewer? Okay, great. Looks like most of you answered this. So I will share those results. There we go. More than half of you have also served as peer reviewers, so that's great. That means some of you have at least had this experience on both sides, which is fantastic. Some of you have not, and one of you wanted to know, how do I become a peer reviewer? I thought we might get that response, and that's something I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes as well. All right. So for those of you who have not served as peer reviewers and might be thinking about it, here's some great reasons why it's a good idea to be a peer reviewer. I talked before about how peer review is meant to improve the quality of published work. So that in itself is a great reason. It also helps you become a better writer, and it helps you improve the quality of your own research by looking at other people's work and thinking about things that you have, questions that come up. That critical thinking can definitely help you in doing your own research and publishing it. It's also a great way to stay up to date with research in your field. If you're reviewing work in your field, then you're definitely going to be seeing it even before it's published. And it's always a great thing to add to your CV. I did some peer review. I'm experienced. I'm, active in my field. So these are great reasons to become a peer reviewer yourself if you are thinking about it and haven't done so yet. But that does, of course, lead to the question: how do you become a peer reviewer? Number one is, publishing your own work. Publishing high quality papers will definitely attract the attention of editors who might be looking for reviewers. So you want to keep your ORC ID up to date so that editors can find you. And if you're looking at this and thinking, what's an ORCID? This is a great time to sign up for one. If you don't know how to do that, you can, of course, contact the library and we can help you get that set up. I would guess, though, most of you probably have an ORC ID already and are out there doing your peer review. So definitely keep that up to date if that's something you do. Also, using good titles and keywords can make your articles easier to find, more searchable and that sort of thing. So all of these are ways to just basically, increase your visibility as a researcher. Beyond that, ask your mentor or supervisor. This is such a central part of being a researcher and being in academia. I think many mentors would be happy to help you co-write a peer review if the journal allows for that. They can also alternatively recommend you to a journal editor as a peer reviewer, and that might be a great way to get started. But talk to your mentor is probably a great place to start if you want to start being a peer reviewer. Otherwise, networking is always a helpful thing to do. You can meet journal editors at conferences and talk to them about your interests. That's a great way to get involved as well. And in some cases, you can actually volunteer to review. Elsevier has a reviewer hub, and you'll see this in the handout at the end of today's session as well, where you can actually volunteer and indicate your interest and your availability to review for any Elsevier journal. So they have that available. Other resources that might be useful for you. Publons is a site where you can make a profile and track peer review activity on your papers. So it shows the total number of peer reviews completed for each journal where your research was reviewed. And that information on that site is imported from Web of Science, from ORCID, and actually from your EndNote library. So that's a great way to just track your activity and see what's going on. So that's a useful resource. There's also a site called Faculty Opinions. And this site is where faculty sign up and review articles that have actually already been published. So basically, it's peer review that happens after publication. And I think kind of the idea is to show that peer review is something that is a continuous process even once the paper's out there. And that's a great place to look and see. You'll be able to tell if there's a journal that shows up a lot as, ooh, this is not well-reviewed research. That might be a red flag for you to stay away from that journal. Or alternatively, you can learn from looking at some of these, post-publication peer reviews, which journals are publishing the highest quality research. So that's a great way to look at that as well. It looks like Elsevier also has a certified peer reviewer course. So if you want to just learn the basics of it, that's another good resource for you. Generally speaking, there's not any specific qualifications for being a peer reviewer. Usually you need to have a PhD and sort of, be beyond that step in your career. But otherwise, it's something to, get into as soon as you can. And again, for reasons I've talked about before, it's a great way to boost your resume as well, or your CV as well. So we have a question in Q&A. I've been asked to review work that's quite close to my own research. At what point should I review based on potential conflict of interest? That's a fantastic question. Yes, conflict of interest. In reviewing papers, if it's somebody that you've worked with too closely, or I think more frequently what it is maybe it's a competitor, or a lab, somebody in a lab that's doing the same work you are, and you don't want to, that's a clear case of a conflict, and you can tell the editor that. At what point do I refuse? That's kind of that's something that can vary, I think, from situation to situation. If it's close to your own research, as in it's your expertise, then that's great. If it's somebody that you don't have a very good working relationship with, you don't think you could give an unbiased review, it's okay to say, you have a potential conflict of interest. Generally speaking, when these sort of questions come up about, is there conflict of interest? If you're not sure, err on the side of, I don't think I can give an unbiased review on this. I need to step away. And I think that's, most people are going to be okay with that. Okay, let's find another reviewer. If you don't think you can give a clear, unbiased answer, no one's going to, no one's going to get angry at you for that. That's okay to be, transparent about that. So I think hopefully I answered your question there. Did anyone have any other questions related to that? That isn't something I covered before. But yes, that is a great comment. We'll advance to the end of the show. Let's see, it looks like, so I think David has put into the chat, there's a link to the Elsevier. Okay, great. I see he's also included the handout, so that's also in the chat for those who would like to. So do we need to update Publons manually? I believe that the site pulls the data from the other sources. So as long as you keep like your ORCID up to date, and you have and any publication info that you have to update, as long as you're updating that elsewhere, I think Publons will pull from those other databases to keep that up to date. Correct me if I'm David or Soraya, if you know something else there, please feel free to step in, but that's my understanding of how that site works.
Erica, that is correct.
Okay.
Publons is connected with Web of Science. It's one of their products.
Right.
So you log in to your Publons account, or you register for one, and then you can import that. You can have it automatically import information, your publications from Web of Science. It does have to be indexed in Web of Science, but there are other resources that it can connect to. And I think you can set it up to where it automatically does it, or you can review it before. I just had a little notification and it showed, oh, is this your publication? And it was, so I was able to add it.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great resource. Yes, so we have, so again, if you have questions that you can't think about in these last couple of minutes while we're here in the live session, remember you can always email the library at the link that looks like Soraya put in the chat. You can also email us, and those of you who are on the team for Dear Editor, I'd be happy to answer questions through that as well. And I think I saw a couple of notifications. A couple of people are already going to jump in and join that. So that's a great resource as well. Today's session, the team also has links to handouts and resources from previous Dear Editor sessions we did as well. So you can feel free to peruse those. All right. I think we answered everything in the Q of A. Did anyone have any other questions before we wrap up the broadcast today? Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Always happy to share our resources with you. And again, if you have questions about peer review or anything else, we'll be happy to answer those. Oh, I do see another question now in Q&A. Should we thank the reviewer for each comment? I have seen it done that way. I've seen that done both ways. I've seen response letters where the front of it says, thank you for all comments. I've also seen specific thanks for each comment as appropriate. So it may be, hey, thanks for bringing this to our attention, or hey, we thank you for your consideration, or thank you for bringing this to our attention so we can address it. So you can do it either way. If there's 50 different comments, it might get a little repetitive after a while, so you can kind of start it at the beginning. But in other cases, yeah, if there's maybe 10 comments or something, you can say, oh, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Here's what we did about it within each comment. And you can be sort of brief about it. You don't have to be effusive, each time you thank a reviewer. Another question, is it standard or expected practice to recirculate to all authors and wait for feedback prior to resubmission or response to comments? And wait for feedback. I think it depends on the situation. I do think if you're going to make, changes to your paper, especially extensive changes, you do want to communicate with your co-authors as a team, to make sure that you're all on the same page about it. Probably more often what you'll get is, a few of you will respond and everyone says, okay, that looks good, and we'll just go from there. But, as we talked about with authorship issues a couple of months ago, you do want all your co-authors to be on the same page when you submit a paper to a journal, because what you don't want to do is have it go back to the journal and then there's a discrepancy or some, two of you disagree. You don't want to get the journal involved in that. So I think it's probably a good idea to at least share with everyone, changes that have made, give people a little bit of a chance to say something and then respond and then, send it back. Whether you need to wait for extensive feedback, depends on the paper, depends on, how each of the, depends on each author's contribution. But I think it's a good idea to keep on the same page. So I'll say that. I think I've answered questions for now, unless something else comes up. As I said before, feel free to contact the library separately, contact us, again, join the team, and we'll post all of the links to everything there. And we will see you again next month.